Yep. Welcome everybody to Cupola Conversations. We will be starting momentarily. We're just waiting for more attendees to log in. Hey everyone, welcome to Cupola Conversations. We are going to get started in just 1 minute. We just have a number of attendees joining right now. Hey everyone, welcome to Cupola Conversations. Today's Cupola is entitled 9/11, How Far Have We Come? I'm Eric Newble, Associate Vice Chancellor in the Division of Student Affairs here at East Carolina University, and as a New York City native who grew up in the shadow of the World Trade Center and who lost 2 people that day, I am truly honored to serve as your moderator. Today's Cupola Conversations is part of East Carolina University's week of events commemorating the 20th anniversary of the 9/11 attacks in New York City, Washington, D.C., and Shanksville, Pennsylvania. For many, it is hard to believe that this defining day in our nation's modern history occurred 20 years ago. While for others, this day was only something you read about or watched video footage of. For everyone in our country and across much of the world, these attacks have changed travel, foreign policy, and impacted families and communities on a very personal level. Every year in the United States on September 11th, people gather to commemorate and remember the 2,977 souls that were lost in the attacks. 6 moments of silence mark the times when each of the World Trade Center towers were struck, when each tower fell, and the time corresponding to the attack at the Pentagon, and the crash of United Airlines Flight 93 in Pennsylvania. We also remember the continued losses we felt the years following due to injuries, disease, military conflict, and hate, all connected to that fateful day. So as you all process this information, I will bring in our panel of students, faculty, and community members. This Cupola Conversations is being recorded so it can be viewed later, but if you are watching today live, we ask that you write in questions in the little question box in the right top hand corner of your screen. I would like to now welcome our 5 panelists for today's conversation. I'm going to have each one introduce themselves, starting with our student panelist, Iman Siddiqui.
Yes, hi everyone. My name is Iman Siddiqui. I'm a sophomore here at East Carolina University, and I am currently the president of MSA, which is the Muslim Student Association here on campus. And it's really a great honor to be here today representing the Muslim student body on this panel.
Next will be Dr. Russell.
Hello, welcome everyone. My name is Mona Russell. I'm an associate professor of history here at ECU. I've been here since 2007. My specialty is modern Middle East history. So naturally, it covers the history of Islam. And because of this kind of overlap, when it came to 2001, there were quite a few people in this country that did not know about the history of Islam. My life became a lot more complicated at that moment in time. In addition to that, I'm an Arab American. My mother is Egyptian, so it's really, my life is a little bit complicated, and I'm sure as the conversation goes on, you'll find out a little bit more about that.
Thank you. Dr. Krishnan.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Amin Krishnan. I'm an associate professor in the Department of Political Science, and I'm also the director of the Security Studies program. I teach courses in intelligence studies and security studies at ECU, and also do some research in the field. So my most recent book was on paramilitary operations. So I looked also into the CIA covert action in Afghanistan during the 1980s, which is a major connection to the 9/11 attacks. So thank you very much for the invitation.
Thank you, Dr. Krishnan. Next is Jeff Moore. Jeff, can you hear us? Oh, you're muted, Jeff.
Can you hear me now?
Yep.
Okay. My name is Jeff Moore. I earned my undergraduate and master's degree at East Carolina University in American military history. I was working in the Pentagon on 9/11, so I went through 2 explosions that day, once when the plane came in and once when the outside fuel tank cooked off. Later on, I earned my PhD in counterinsurgency from the University of Exeter in England. I've written a book on military intelligence in the Pacific. I wrote a book on counterinsurgency in Thailand, and I've done some executive protection jobs as well, including the London 2012 Olympics.
Right, and last is, and certainly not least, is Dr. Silvernail. Unfortunately, we have some video issues, so we won't see Dr. Silvernail. So you get to look at me as he talks.
Just imagine a human Dalmatian hybrid. I've got lots of freckles. So, hey everybody, I'm John Silvernail, physician, longtime firefighter, fire officer, former current New York State fire instructor. I too am a recovering Yankee. In 2012, I moved down here to join the faculty at Brody. Served for 7 years in the Department of the Department of Physical Medicine and Rehabilitation, and then moved over to the Pitt County Health Department, where I have been serving as the Public Health Director for Pitt County since July 1st of 2019. My connection to 9/11 is that I was the Chief Medical Officer for the New York State Urban Search and Rescue Team based in Albany, New York, at the time of the attacks, and came to be standing before what was the Trade Center shortly after dark that evening, and spent the next 2 days there working mostly on the north side of the pile, but worked my way around the pile at one point as well. So got to see it firsthand and experienced the disaster up close and personal.
Thank you. Just hearing all of your backgrounds, I'm really excited to start this conversation. So the first question is really for everyone, and we're going to let Dr. Silvernail, since you're already up, to start that off. Looking back on the past 20 years since 9/11, what's your initial reaction to this anniversary?
Well, Eric, I can't believe it's been 20 years, an event that has come in so many ways to define my life, both good and bad. I think my experience in 9/11 eventually led me to seek escape from New York, led me to Brody because I wanted to be back in academic medicine. When it came time to replace my predecessor, Dr. Morrow, at the health department, a number of the folks on the Board of Health had worked with me at the hospital and through occupational health at the hospital, and felt I would be a good candidate to move into the health director role here in Pitt County. Unfortunately, my emergency management background has been well tested in these first 2 years. We had a hurricane about 3 months after I started on the job, and then COVID arrived about 6 months after I started on the job. And we've been in a position of sort of being the fire department of health here in Pitt County these past 2 years. So I find it, like I said, it's just amazing that 20 years have gone by. My boys were born in July of 2002. So I always said they were my reward for going to Trade Center. I look at my sons and say, my God, how did my sons get to be 19? But they really are sort of children of the Trade Center, in many ways my reward for going to Trade Center. And I guess I'll stop there.
Great, thank you. Dr. Krishnan, we'll jump to you.
So my initial reaction to this anniversary is that the war on terror is not over. The state of national emergency related to 9/11 is still ongoing. We're still engaged in counterterrorism operations against jihadist groups across the world. So we are still facing a powerful enemy. And our freedoms are still restricted as a result of 9/11. And I think that we still don't really understand what caused 9/11. As long as we don't understand the root causes of 9/11, we are bound to repeat the mistakes that we've made. And we will continue making the same mistakes over and over again. And that's the reason why we can't end this endless war on terror. And that's the very sad story about it. So I'm afraid that something like 9/11 could happen again. We're not out of the woods. So that is my reaction.
Thank you. And we are going to use first names now. Sorry, Armin. Mona, you're next.
Okay, my kitty cat is on my lap trying to steal the show. I'm struck by both personal reflections and professional ones, just as Dr. Silvernail and Dr. Krishnan. First, I'm struck in kind of going back and remembering just how much warmth and sympathy and compassion there was for people who were, Arab Americans and Muslim Americans. People called me to see if I was okay. Are you and your family okay? Reaching out to see, is everything going okay for you and your family? And that kind of moment kind of stands out to me. And yet, as I kind of think about the last 20 years, I also think about how profoundly my life has changed when I travel and how difficult that is and how my life is not the same. And I'm really kind of a good case study because I'm kind of a hidden Arab with a name like Russell. But my passport says that I'm born in Cairo. And so I see a big change. I'm the right age that I know exactly what life was like before 9/11, and I know the marked change that took place in my life, particularly when traveling internationally after 9/11. So there's a kind of sadness that comes, every year with 9/11 too. So I guess those would be kind of my two kind of thoughts about 9/11.
Thank you so much. Iman?
Yeah, I just thought it was really interesting because Dr. Silvernail was talking about his own kids, and I was actually born in May of 2002, so pretty much around the same time. My mom was expecting me during 9/11. So, for people who weren't born at that time, the occasion is just a really solemn occasion. We can still recognize the tragedy even though we weren't there, just because of the legacy that carries on. And this is still considered a time for reflection for all of us, not just the ones who were there and the ones who witnessed it.
Great, thank you. And Jeff?
Sure. For me, because I went through those two explosions, 9/11 is always kind of hanging around. It's just becomes part of your blood, part of your spirit. I would say that's number one. And number two, I was already in the Pentagon arena to begin with. And basically, it just kept fueling the next job or the next educational opportunity, my PhD in the executive protection that I ended up doing. And it even fueled my startup company that we're doing now. We track violence around the world, especially regarding hotels and things of that nature. So yeah, basically 9/11 never stopped. And again, the memory of it, sometimes it seems like yesterday and sometimes it seems like 2 weeks ago, but it's never more than a month ago.
Well, let's stick with you, Jeff, right now for the next question.
Sure.
When you think about those memories and the moments, what do you recall from that time, that day?
Well, just we were watching the planes hit the towers on CNN, which is in every colonel's office in the Pentagon. And I was asking Colonel Hughes, my boss at the time, do you think we'll be involved in some kind of fight back? And he said, sure, but we don't know exactly what it is at the moment. So I said, okay. And I walked back to my desk and picked up the phone to call my uncle, who was retired from United Airlines. And when that happened, the right wall, the wall behind me basically exploded, and a big barreling corkscrew fireball came in the room and knocked me silly, and I was out of it for just a little bit. And long story short, we ended up in the E-ring trying to rescue people there, and that's when the second explosion, the outside fuel tank from the Pentagon, cooked off, and that was pretty hellacious. That was when we really thought we were going to die. The building stopped shaking, and we made our way out. So that's what we were doing.
Wow. Dr. Silvernail, if you can share too some of what that time was like, especially in the role that you were in Albany.
Yeah, first I got to say I agree with Jeff. 9/11 never ended for those of us in the response business. We were clearly told to keep our bags packed, to be ready to deploy because we expected another domestic event that would require our services. So my USAR gear was always in the back of my truck, along with my normal turnout gear for the fire department. And, basically we lived on edge waiting for that next deployment to come, which thankfully it never did come. It also made us rethink many of our operations. In the fire service, we talk about rehab, where we need to rest, rehydrate, medically evaluate our staff. And we consolidate some of those support services. And we had to rethink that in an age of terrorism, where if we consolidated those support services, it made it a better target, an easier target. And that was hard to explain to firefighters who hadn't been through the experience of responding to 9/11, that guys, this might have been a good idea before the attacks, but you have to understand you're potentially targets now and you need to make the targets harder to hit.
Wow. We're going to jump on over to both Dr. Krishnan and Dr. Russell. First, Dr. Krishnan. So what were your experiences to both of you, not necessarily being at the site or involved literally in the attack? What were your experiences watching it play out on TV?
My story is a bit boring in this respect. So I was in Germany at the time and I was a student. I saw the attacks unfold on TV like so many people on that day. I did understand that something very historical happened on that day, and that it was a huge tragedy and that many things would change afterwards, but I did not understand why it happened. So that was a big mystery to me. It didn't have any major consequences to my life. I mean, there was obviously a lot of debate in the media, but being in Germany, there was not much of a connection to 9/11. I mean, the main German connection here was Mohammed Atta. So that was one of the hijackers who had studied in Hamburg before engaging in that act of terrorism. But apart from that, I didn't feel much in Germany. And only once I became a student in Britain, I got more interested in the reasons behind 9/11. So I studied intelligence and I took a course on terrorism and counterterrorism, and that was the first time I really got into that subject.
Great. Dr. Russell?
So at the time I was at MIT, and I remember that morning, it was not a day I was teaching, but I used to drop my kids off at the preschool there at MIT. My kids were, pretty young at the time. And I dropped them off at the preschool and I was walking through the Infinite Corridor to go to on my way to go to the gym when the first tower came down. And in the old days, for all the young people out there, I was listening to my music. I had a CD player to take to the gym, but it also had a radio, and I was listening to the radio. And the radio, the people didn't know what was going on. I mean, they were like, there's something just hit the World Trade Center, and there was great confusion about it, that even by the time that I got to the gym and on an elliptical, it still is with the TVs going, people were still trying to figure out what was going on when we all watched the second tower. And it was just like, what? And just watching all the people in the weight room and, on the exercise equipment, we all just stopped and stared. The number of my former students were in the room. We all just stopped and stood and stared. Our jaws just dropped open. And we knew it was a life-changing moment.
So Dr. Russell, we're going to stay with you because our next question, when that happened, obviously, there was this big sense of unity and patriotism that rose up out of the ashes of 9/11. But I'm really interested in both you and then Iman's point of view after you. What was the feeling within the Muslim and Arab communities after 9/11?
Well, as I mentioned in the kind of introduction, I was very warmed by the kind of feeling of people checking out, amongst the community and checking on people. And a lot of people I know, including myself, went out and did a lot of service work to talk about, what Islam is and, who what it is and what it isn't. At the same time, though, one of the things that particularly disturbed me, and this is something that just disturbed me, I'm not speaking for everybody here, but I was shocked every time I watched TV and people felt they had the need to say, I condemn terrorism. You know, eh, why would anyone have to condemn terrorism when they're not associated with it just because they're Arab or Muslim? It's not necessary. To me, that it just bothered me that there was this intrinsic connection that in order to even be heard in an interview, you had to condemn terrorism. And that just to say, of course I do this, and all the student groups, all the Muslim student associations across the country condemn terrorism, and just all across the board, this was something that had to be done in order to be accepted.
So in the years following, Iman, I'm sure you've talked about it with your family, and also it's something like we've all talked about that doesn't really go away. 9/11. How has that kind of shaped your time growing up?
Yeah, of course. So, as you said, I did grow up hearing my mother's account of 9/11 because in school, ever since I could remember, around the anniversary, we would do projects and things related to informing ourselves and informing the class on the events that happened. So I've pretty much, I know my mother's anecdote by heart, and it goes like she was expecting me at the time, and she had walked into work. Only to see that her colleagues were shutting her out very subtly with their shoulders and backs sort of facing towards her. And in those moments, she felt a lot of emotions. There was a lot of discomfort, fear, loneliness, and then there was also that sense of misplaced guilt that a lot of Muslims had at the time. My mother, and this was one of the things that I remember the most from when she was telling me her story. She's an artist, and she used to specialize in Islamic art. Shortly after 9/11, she received a call from a gift shop owner who was displaying her art at the time. And the owner was basically saying, you need to come pick up your work. And she found it at the front door. It was wrapped up in brown paper to cover up the Arabic lettering. And for my mom, this was a really difficult moment because there was sort of like a loss in faith in that Americanness, because my mother's been here since she was a teenager. And it was made all the more burdensome because the calligraphy that she wrote was salam, which meant peace. What a lot of people don't realize is that this was a loss for Muslims as well as any other American. The difference was that people like my parents, people like my mom, felt that they couldn't mourn openly. And so for many Muslim Americans like my mother, 9/11 was a catalyst for community service and interfaith activism, like Dr. Russell was saying earlier. Instead of hiding in their homes and living in fear, they tried their best to work and build bridges and connections and educate people on the religion of Islam and the culture. And there's no doubt that visibly Muslim women in hijab, like me and my mother and all the other covered women out there, became a target for hate crimes. And then brown men like my father were also subject to discrimination and Islamophobia. But then there was also that path that my parents' generation, or the generation before my own, was built for Muslim Americans today. And they're the reason that my own generation can continue to break barriers and stereotypes.
So Iman, we're going to stay with you. Talk a little bit about what it was like in high school and even at ECU. Like every year this comes up, right? Every year this event, 9/11 comes on the calendar. What happens at school? What are the kind of things that are either discussed or maybe not discussed in classroom settings and faculty settings?
Right. So my experience with this actually goes back to the time of third grade, because I attended a private Islamic school. So I had to very quickly learn about why there was extra security guards stationed outside of our mosque, because we went to school at the mosque. It was our school was on the top floor, and then the local mosque was on the bottom floor. So we had to learn why the policemen would be outside of our doors every anniversary of 9/11, because there would be threats called into our school. And as I progressed to high school, the discussions regarding this and the anniversary of 9/11 it included more of a broad narrative than I had when I was in my private Islamic school, but everyone was still always very careful to emphasize that the actions of one group are not indicative of an entire people's values. And I think that the reason for this was that I went to a very diverse high school. The Arab and Muslim population was very large. So I think the narrative there was also helped out a little bit in that sense. In terms of ECU, I can't really say much because I've only been here for around 2 years, and my first year was pretty much all completely virtual. So that one is still pending.
Well, great. Well, hopefully this week will get you engaged in that way. Yeah. So the next question is for everyone, and we're going to start with Dr. Russell. So when we're looking at media, particularly now social media, right? How has that influenced the narrative in our nation and abroad around these attacks?
Well, I think if we go back even before these attacks, that Arabs in movies and popular culture and Muslims are really portrayed in a rather vicious manner. There's no secret there. And that these attacks have only multiplied and escalated those kinds of portrayals in movie and TV and so on. You add to social media, that just, creates a kind of exponential kind of doubling, tripling, quadrupling, all those kinds of images just, panning across screens everywhere. So I'd say it's made it much, 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 much worse. So I would say, yeah, that's really changed the whole kind of game by putting it on social media.
Dr. Krishnan?
Well, in 2001, there wasn't much social media. I mean, not many people actually used the internet back in 2001. So I don't think that social media had much of an impact. Back at that time, only over the last 10 years or so, I think that that social media shaped narratives and our perceptions of reality to a great deal. And at that time, I think a lot about 9/11 was already forgotten. So the hot phase, when it was a hot topic, was really in the early 2000s. And at that time, what the media presented to us in Germany as well as in Britain, it was not very informative. So I didn't learn much about 9/11 and the underlying causes. Only when I started to read up myself in 2009, 2010. So I got a whole lot of books. I was reading the 9/11 Commission report. Only then I began to understand why it could have happened. And I got an understanding of some of the details related to the attack. But I don't think that we get anything out of the media, especially as it relates to 9/11. And I don't think that we get a lot from the education system about 9/11. So it's very disappointing. I think that a lot of people living today, they're not aware about many facts about 9/11. And I think that's largely a failing of the media and of the education system.
Thank you. Jeff and Dr. Silvernail, as two individuals who clearly were intimately connected, how has that media, social media, especially in the last 10 years, how has that really influenced, both your memories, but also that narrative moving forward?
Sure. For me, like Armin just said, there wasn't a lot of social media. You weren't pulling up Facebook and watching this stuff, but there were a lot of documentaries and whatnot on television. And so from that angle, it looked like just historical narratives, what we were watching on Nat Geo and the History Channel, for example. I can say from a field point of view or a national security point of view or a private security point of view, we saw Muslims as our best friends because there's no way that some outside power was going to have a negative or thorough or effective negative impact on Islamist jihadism. So when I was a professor, for example, at National Defense University, we were teaching scores and scores of Muslims. And I ended up going to do field research in Thailand, in southern Thailand, where Muslims were protecting me while I was doing my research. And when I was doing some other activities in Indonesia, my brother of another mother is an Indonesian, and then he was a colonel, now he's a general. And so we're all very much aligned on what needs to be done. And again, we just saw Muslims as our partners and our best friends in this fight.
Great, Dr. Silvernell, the same question kind of with that, talking about the media and social media.
Yeah, I don't do much with social media. My wife tells me I should be on Facebook, but I try to stay away from that as much as I can. I think maybe the one area where it has probably hurt us again is in helping to spread conspiracy theories and misinformation about 9/11. 9/11 was an inside job, these kinds of things. As to Muslims, I would agree with Jeff. I've had many Muslim and Arab friends through the years, classmates, colleagues. One of my great mentors was an Egyptian-born gynecologist. Loved Dr. Sattar, would do anything for Dr. Sattar. He was a great medical mentor to me. So I've never harbored any personal animus towards Muslims individually. Certainly I harbor animus towards the people who committed the acts of 9/11, but not towards Muslims as a group or Arabs as a group.
So we're going to jump back to Jeff again for this one. And how is that, what's been the influence on foreign and domestic policy? How has that changed since the attacks?
Well, obviously, from a national security point of view, for CONUS, the continental United States, and the rest of the world, there has been this one continual war on terror, and over 30 countries are earnestly involved in this. And I think that all of our national security programs, from local law enforcement, national law enforcement, intelligence, and military operations from in every continent on the world, has been involved in this nonstop since 9/11. And so if you go to another country and engage with them, there's going to be a lot of talk about terrorism and counterinsurgency, and it's a nonstop kind of thing.
Dr. Krishnan, the same question.
Well, there are a couple of things that I disagreed with in terms of the policies that were pursued by the United States after 9/11. So there were a lot of bad things happening, including the war on Iraq, the invasion of Iraq. That was something I very much disagreed with. And I think that a lot of mistakes were made in the war on terror. And that's the reason why we can't end the war on terror. And the other thing that I find highly problematic is the beginning of mass surveillance that started under the Bush administration and that has continued. So we are losing our freedoms, and it's not really the fault of the terrorists. So we should try to do a better job in terms of fighting terrorism without sacrificing our core values. So I think we need to make some adjustments both in our domestic policies as well as in our foreign policy. And because if we are continuing with our approach of arming the radicals, then we will always get the same kind of problem. The radicals will eventually attack us. And we are seeing that in Afghanistan, where we have armed a lot of radicals over there, and we will see some bad repercussions from that, I'm sure.
So, Dr. Krishnan, we're going to stay with you because you basically set up the next question, which is with the 20th anniversary of 9/11, and then all that has occurred over the last week, 2 weeks in Afghanistan. What are the connections here? We hear a lot about in the media about the connection, and you've alluded to it a little bit, but what are those connections as you see it? And we're going to ask this question of all the panelists.
Okay, so I've tried to look at 9/11 from the historical context. So why did it happen? What kind of conditions gave rise to this kind of radical Islamism or jihadism? And what I found is that the United States government as well as the British government were in part responsible for supporting extremism, especially in the 1980s when we were working with the Mujahideen. And we were also working with other radical Islamic groups in the 1990s. And that kind of created the problem. And now we're dealing with Afghanistan again. So we're back to square one. So in 2001, the Taliban were in charge of Afghanistan, and they were hosting a radical Islamic group, Al-Qaeda. And now the Taliban are back in charge of Afghanistan, and they're hosting another radical Islamic group, ISIS. So we do not seem to have achieved much in the 20 years. So that is the thing that I see as most problematic here.
Reminder to our those attending the event, you can ask questions, and there's that opportunity in that top right-hand corner with the question mark. So we're going to move on to Dr. Russell, the same question about relation or connection with Afghanistan.
Now, I completely agree with Dr. Krishnan here. There was a lot of fodder in terms of kind of imperialist sorts of policies in which you're supporting one group against another group. That first group comes back and comes back to bite you. The war against communism created, a whole nother kind of series of problems. And so we're really kind of seeing the repercussions of a lot of bad policies. I mean, it's not just one thing. You can't just isolate, well, here's what it is. This is what created why we are here today. It's, there's all kinds of problems. So there's multiple layers of problems upon layers of problems that are all layered over each other for not just 1 year, not 20 years, but for, decades.
So we're going to jump right to Jeff now. Same question.
Hold on.
Oh, now you're muted.
Just one.
There you go.
Yeah. So, yeah, Afghanistan. Well, it looks like the United States has handed the Islamist jihadists a major victory right here on the 20th anniversary of 9/11. A lot of Islamist jihadists believe that God had ordained this victory as they did the defeat of the Soviets. They believe, some of them believe that God had ordained the attacks on 9/11 and then the establishment of the ISIS caliphate in Iraq and Syria. And so it looks like this might be perceived as their fourth international Islamist jihadist global rally with this defeat, their victory in God's eyes. And if that's the case, and if the pattern holds true, we're probably looking at a lot more terrorism to come, not only from the Taliban and their allies, but people who will go to Afghanistan to train and then take those kill skills back to their respective countries, because it's happened before. It will likely happen again.
Dr. Silvernail?
I'm not an international policy expert by any means, but over the years since 9/11, my concerns about responding to another terrorist attack have waxed and waned. I think Afghanistan makes me, more inclined to believe that I will see another terrorist attack in the U.S., in the remainder of my professional life. I think at this point we do appear weak after the bungled Afghanistan pullout, and I know that's probably an unpopular thing to say, but I think I agree with Jeff that I think we're going to see growth of terrorism in our absence, and that will have consequences in other countries and potentially in the continental United States as well.
Great, thank you. So I know Iman, our student, had to vacate due to a fire alarm. So Iman, are you able to answer?
Yeah, I'm currently outside, so if I get cut off, that's my bad.
Really, I don't have a lot to say. You know, the doctors and people who have a lot of knowledge and experience in this, and all I see really is I'm looking at it from, you know, a young person's perspective that's grown up with social media and it's very involved in that whole social media phenomenon and scene. And whenever I think about this, all I see is that, you know, people are dying, people are getting hurt, and for me, there's really nothing else about it. It's just something that's really sad and tragic. But you know, of course, that's because I speak from the perspective of a student who isn't very learned in the complexities of, you know, security and war. And I think I have to leave. I'm so sorry.
No, it's okay. So we are at our final question of the evening. And really, this is a chance to kind of, for you all to add anything you want to wrap it up, but also to kind of talk about, you know, what do you maybe hope the legacy of 9/11 is going to be as we move into the future in this post-COVID world? And we'll start with Dr. Silver now.
Well, Eric, I certainly hope we've learned something from this. In a response, from a response standpoint, one of the things that comes up over and over again is communications, and yet communications remain a problem. You know, both at a tactical and a national level, from a communication standpoint. One of the things that I think was missed from a health standpoint, public health standpoint, is the impact of events like this, both physical and behavioral or mental health wise. Folks who were at Trade Center, folks who were at the Pentagon continue to suffer with health issues from this 20 years later. Many individuals have died, especially those who were at the Trade Center from Trade Center related maladies. I haven't seen as many folks from the Pentagon, Jeff, but I've seen at least one person from the Pentagon, and I've cared for these folks and cared for my team members over the years since 9/11 and tried to help them get to resources. The other thing that I hope we learn from 9/11 and hopefully can apply to events in the future, whether they're natural disasters or technological disasters, you know, terrorist attacks, is that the behavioral health footprint of these things is many times the physical footprint of the disaster. The Trade Center disaster site was 16 acres, you know, of southern Manhattan. Yet it's an event that has touched the psyche of folks across the country, and you know, we need to realize that and make plans and provisions for not only dealing with the physical health impact of these events, but also the behavioral health impact of these events. And the same is true for COVID that we're going with now. I think we're reaching a point now where the behavioral health impacts of COVID may be larger than the physical health impacts of COVID. And I'll stop there.
Absolutely. Jeff?
Right. So I see 9/11 as the Pearl Harbor of a new generation, or, you know, our generation. But unlike World War II, where we had a definitive enemy, two distinct theaters of warfare, one in Europe, one in the Asia Pacific, and there was a definite flow to military operations and a definitive end, it doesn't seem like anything like that is going to happen anytime soon. And in fact, I think America's track record in irregular warfare is incredibly mixed. You know, we have wonderful abilities to capture and kill, but really to influence other people and to engage in counterinsurgency, unless you count the surge in Iraq, we have a very poor track record in that regard. So I don't think that the legacy of 9/11 is yet written. I think we've got a long way to go.
Thank you, Jeff. Dr. Russell?
I think I'd like us to remember the kind of unity that we felt, at least for one brief moment, right after 9/11 as a country, particularly when we see how divided we are right now, and that even when communities like Arab Americans and Muslim Americans felt downtrodden, as we discussed, you know, they kind of channeled that into kind of energy and community service, and that we kind of move forward with that kind of legacy. And Secondly, that we kind of use the knowledge that we have to move forward. If we look at a moment, for instance, like the Boston Marathon bombing, you can see some of the successes and some of the failures. In other words, it took place, but we can see some of the application of the technologies that were being harnessed in capturing the criminals fairly rapidly.
Thank you. Dr. Krishnan.
So I agree with Jeff that we are not yet ready to understand the legacy of 9/11 because it's not yet over. And I think that that future historians might look back at 9/11 and say 9/11 was the point when the United States declined as a superpower. So that was probably a major turning point in history. In 2001, the United States was at its peak of its power. And afterwards, the US made a couple of poor choices, like the invasion of Iraq and like the Afghanistan war. And that started this kind of process of decline, ending in our inability to defeat an enemy like the Taliban. And the military defeat in Afghanistan is actually worse than the military defeat in Vietnam. At least in Vietnam, we were dealing with people who had major state sponsorship by the Chinese and by the Soviet Union. The biggest powers in the world were sponsoring them. And the Taliban, they don't seem to have a major state sponsor, and we still lost. So that is something that I see as a sign that the United States is on its way down as a superpower. And so that might be the legacy of 9/11.
Thank you. Iman, we're on our final question. I know you were dealing with the fire alarm, sorry. You dealt with it beautifully though. We're really talking about what the legacy is going forward of 9/11 and kind of what we think, but also hope.
Oh, right. So I was able to catch what Dr. Russell was saying, and I think everything that, from my perspective, everything that I would have to say sort of follows along the lines of what she was saying, just the camaraderie and just, I know that I haven't, personally, I'm very lucky to have grown up in an environment where I haven't felt discriminated against, or, nobody's really made very hurtful or racist comments against me because of sorry, one second. There's a lot of things happening in my dorm right now. So I think the legacy of 9/11 is just the coming together as America, not just as like separate entities.
Great. I want to thank all the participants today, as well as everyone joining in to watch. Today's Cupola Conversation is a part of a week of programming organized by East Carolina University's Center for Leadership and Civic Engagement, focused on the 20th anniversary of 9/11. Tomorrow, Thursday, September 9th, there are 2 programs occurring in the main campus Student Center. Both are in room 125. At 3 p.m., there will be a workshop and a conversation on the origins of terror, January 1979 to September 2001. This will be followed by the screening of the 9/11 documentary, 102 Minutes That Changed America, at 7 p.m. On Friday, September 10th, there will be ECU's annual 9/11 Day of Service. So please sign up on the service link on the engage.ecu.edu page. And also, as you're doing that on Friday and Saturday, please check out the mall, where there will be a beautiful display of American flags to honor the 20th anniversary. The main event for the week will be the Remembrance Ceremony and Memorial Dedication, which will take place at the main campus Student Center lawn under Pirate Vision at 9 a.m. on Saturday, September 11th. There, ECU will unveil a student-designed sculpture memorializing the events of 9/11 and the 20th anniversary. It is sure to be a powerful few days leading into the weekend, so please consider attending an event, especially the dedication on Saturday morning. For more information about Never Forget 20 years later 9/11 commemoration, please visit ecunited.ecu.edu/9-11 for a full calendar of events. So as we let you go and thank you for joining the cupola, I'm going to leave you with a quote. This quote is from Sandy Dahl, the wife of Flight 93 pilot Jason Dahl. And many of you have heard it many times, and it's actually at the memorial in New York City. If we learn nothing else from this tragedy, we learn that life is short and there is no time for hate. Pirate Nation, thank you for joining us for Cupola. Thank you to all the participants and the panelists. And once again, go Pirates.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.